Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1342 with a release and air date of Saturday, November 16, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the amateur radio bands all around the world, and streaming on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1342 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Delegates from the ARRL attend the International Amateur Radio Union Region 3 Conference in Thailand. We will have all the details. The 2024 ARRL Board of Directors election results are announced. We will tell you the winners and losers. The National Council of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators has removed one question from the general and extra class question pools. AMSAT celebrates the first A07 Earth Space Earth contact, while the satellite celebrates its 50th year in orbit. Several amateur radio satellites are nearing end-of-life and re-entry into the atmosphere. We will tell you which ones are affected. The SAQ Very Low Frequency Alternator will be activated in Grimmeton, Sweden, transmitting CW for its 100th anniversary. FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel is launching a new series of podcasts. Emergency alert system upgrades for 3 broadcasters is funded by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Singapore's 4,300-kilometre undersea electrical transmission line clears regulatory hurdles. The 2025 Dayton Hamvention Committee releases the theme of the upcoming Ham Fest. The League releases the results for 2024 Field Day. We will have them for you. And a Facebook group combines life on the road with amateur radio. We will tell you all about them in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, Phi K6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will talk about a new radio every week. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will piles us all into the Wayback Machine to take us back in time to the end of World War I to witness the slow reactivation of amateur radio. The Navy well understood how much it had benefited from all the trained amateurs ready to volunteer for service during the war and the likelihood of needing them again someday. We will stop by and visit with Bill Salliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our Chile headquarters studio just outside Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our bureau in Drizzly, Dallas, Texas, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE.
Reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where people are starting to don the coats, sweaters, and jackets, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting live from our news bureau in Western Mass, where November has officially arrived, a month where the leaves are down, the turkeys are nervous, and everyone's frantically trying to remember if it's too early to start playing holiday music. I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our Trey New York News Bureau, where the cold, biting November winds are upon us, I'm Eric, KD2, RJX.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where we're expecting a taste of real winter weather here coming up, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where winter is beginning to peek around the corner, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
With this week's lead story, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF. The 19th International Amateur Radio Union, or IARU Region 3 Conference, was held in Bangkok, Thailand, November 4th through the 8th, 2024. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with all the details on the recent conference.
ARRL is a Region 3 member society and the IARU International Secretariat, and was represented by ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, and International Affairs Vice President Rod Stafford, W6ROD. While most of the United States is in the IARU Region 2, ARRL is also a member society of Region 3, which includes portions of Asia and the Pacific, where ARRL represents the interest of radio amateurs in the U.S. Pacific territories of Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa, as well as amateur radio interest for the U.S. minor outlying islands. 16 IARU R3 member societies participated in the conference. The agenda included a range of items of note to radio amateurs, regionally and globally. One of the major changes to take place at the conference was to revise the way the officers and the executive committee of the region are chosen. The new procedure is much like the election process in Regions 1 and 2. The Secretary-Treasurer is a member of the EC, but without the right to vote. The newly elected officers of the region are President Wisnu Wajaja, YB0AZ, Vice President Mohammed Binawi, 9M2IR, and Secretary-Treasurer Ken Yamamoto, JA1CJP. The conference dealt with a number of routine matters, including reports from all of its coordinators and volunteers. Notably, the conference harmonized the CW portion of the 40-meter band plan with the other regions by making it 7,000 to 7,040 kilohertz CW only. In Roderick's report to the conference, he presented information about amateur radio advocacy accomplished by the ARRL in recent years. Of note was the 2023 decision by the FCC to amend the U.S. amateur radio service rules to replace the baud rate limit on the amateur HF bands with a 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth limit, consistent with ARRL's request to permit greater flexibility in data communications. Roderick also highlighted the success ARRL has seen in growing participation in the ARRL International DX Contest and the Logbook of the World. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Roderick also highlighted the success ARRL has seen in growing participation in the ARRL International DX Contest and Logbook of the World. The conference voted to meet next in Bali, Indonesia, in 2027, for the 20th Triennial Regional 3 Conference.
ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, announces the results of the 2024 ARRL Division elections. In the ARRL New England Division, Tom Frene, K1KI, with 1,593 votes, of West Suffolk, Connecticut, was declared the winner, defeating current director Fred Kemmerer, AB10C, with 1,452 votes. Frene has previously served on the ARRL Board of Directors in several capacities, including as director from 1985 through 1992, and from 1997 through 2018. He was named Director Emeritus in 2019. He served as ARRL Vice President from 1992 through 1996. In the ARRL Hudson Division, incumbent Division Director Ed Wilson, N2XDD, with 949 votes, of Shirley, New York, was declared the winner, defeating John Crivelli, W2GD, with 719 votes. Wilson ascended to director in July 2024, after the previous director resigned. He had been vice director since 2023, a position to which he was appointed to fill a vacancy created when the previous vice director ascended to director. In August, the following incumbents and candidates were declared elected without opposition. In the Central Division, current vice director Brent Walls, N9BA, will be the next director, and candidate Josh Long, W9HT, will be the next vice director. In the Hudson Division, vice director David Gallatly, KM20. In the New England Division, Vice Director Phil Temples, K9HI. In the Northwestern Division, Vice Director Michael Sturber, KG7HQ. In the Roanoke Division, Director Jim Berner, N2ZZ, and Vice Director Bill Marine, N2COP. In September, Northwestern Division Director Mark Thorpe, KB7HDX, was declared elected. Winners will assume their roles for terms beginning January 1, 2025. Members voted online or could request paper ballots. The election was conducted by Third-Party Election Services Company of Melville, New York, the same company that has conducted ARRL elections in 2022 and 2023. The tabulation was observed by Ethics and Elections Committee Chair, ARRL Southeastern Division Director Mickey Baker, N4MB. ARRL is governed by its Board of Directors. Elections are held for 5 of the 15 ARRL divisions each year, for terms of 3 years.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
The National Conference of Volunteer Examiner Coordinators, or NCVEC Question Pool Committee, has removed one extra class pool question and one general class pool question from use. Both extra pool question E2A13 and general pool question G8C01 have been deleted from use on examinations as the two questions each have more than one correct answer. The deleted questions must be removed from examinations as soon as possible. Updated question pool files, including the errata and new information, have been posted on the NCVEC Extra Class Question Pool webpage. The current Element 4 Extra Question Pool became effective on July 1, 2024, and it is valid through June 30, 2028. Updated General Class Question Pool files, also including the errata and new information, have been posted on the NCVEC General Class Question Pool webpage. The current Element 3 General Question Pool became effective on July 1, 2023, and it is valid through June 30, 2027. The ARRL VEC advises the community to regularly check the NCVEC website for updates to the question pools, which may include errata and withdrawn questions.
Amateur satellite operators may be saddened to hear that the satellites XW2B, 2C, and 2D are nearing re-entry into the atmosphere. The 3 identical Chinese microsatellites used for atmospheric physics experiments and amateur radio missions were launched in 2015. In the next few weeks, they will cease to exist after 9 years in orbit when they make a fiery return to Earth. This may be welcome news to some terrestrial operators worldwide, though. Satellite XW2C in particular has been transmitting what appears to be abnormal sweep-like signals on some terrestrial VHF repeater output frequencies for several years.
To celebrate the 100th anniversary of its original transmission across the Atlantic Ocean from the historic World Heritage Grimeton radio station, this is the Alexanderson alternator, which bears the name of pioneering electrical engineer Ernst Alexanderson, and it will activate its original call sign, SAQ, on its Alexanderson alternator and transmit a CW message on December 1. The CW message will transmit on 17.2 kHz at 10 o'clock UTC using an alternating current generator. On December 1 of 1924, the VLF transmitter, with call sign SAQ at Grimeton Radio, was put into commercial operation with transmissions across the Atlantic Ocean into receiving stations in Riverhead and a replying transmitter station at Rocky Point, both on Long Island, New York. Test transmissions are scheduled for November 29th between 1300 to 1600 CET. The transmission event can be seen live on the Grimeton YouTube channel. Fans of the transmitter typically hear its regularly scheduled messages twice a year, on Alexander Sunday in late July or early June, and on Christmas morning. An amateur radio station will also be commemorating the event with call sign SK6 SAQ on the following frequencies: 3.517.2 kHz on CW, 7017.2 on CW, 14017.2 kHz on CW, 3.755 kHz on sideband, and 7.140 kHz also sideband.
Following recent communication issues, NASA's Voyager 1 spacecraft resorted to using a backup radio transmitter that has been inactive since 1981. The Interstellar Explorer experienced a brief pause in communications after putting itself in a protective state to conserve power. This was triggered by a command sent on October 16th from NASA's Deep Space Network, a global array of giant radio antennas, instructing the spacecraft to turn on one of its heaters. The mission's flight team first realized there was an issue with Voyager 1 on October 18th, when the spacecraft failed to respond to that command. The team later discovered that the spacecraft had turned off its primary X-band radio transmitter and instead switched over to its secondary S-band radio transmitter, which uses less power, according to a statement from NASA. The transmitter shutoff seems to have been prompted by the spacecraft's fault protection system, which autonomously responds to onboard issues, NASA officials said in the statement. The team is now working to gather information that will help them figure out what happened and return Voyager 1 to normal operations. Voyager 1's fault protection system can be triggered for a number of reasons, such as if the spacecraft overdraws its power supply. If that happens, the spacecraft will turn off all non-essential systems to conserve power and remain in flight. After sending instructions to Voyager 1 on October 16th, the team expected to receive data back from the spacecraft within a couple of days. It normally takes about 23 hours for a command to travel more than 24 billion kilometers to reach the spacecraft in interstellar space, and then another 23 hours for the flight team on Earth to receive a signal back. However, on October 18th, the team was unable to detect Voyager 1's signal on the X-band frequency that the Deep Space Network antennas were listening for. X-band operates between 8 and 12 gigahertz. This was because, to use less power, the spacecraft's fault protection system lowered the rate at which its radio transmitter was sending back data. The flight team was able to locate a signal later that day, but then on October 19th, communication with Voyager 1 stopped entirely when its X-band transmitter was turned off. The spacecraft's fault protection system is believed to have been triggered twice more, ultimately causing it to switch to the S-band radio transmitter, which operates at 2 and 4 gigahertz, which prior to that date hadn't been used since 1981. Given the spacecraft is located much farther away in interstellar space today than it was 43 years ago, the flight team was not sure a signal on the S-band frequency could be detected, especially because it transmits a significantly fainter signal while using less power. The flight team was not certain the S-band could be detected at Earth due to the spacecraft's distance, but engineers with the Deep Space Network were able to find it. The old S-band transmitter has turned in a reliable performance since October 24th, even from the distance of more than 24 billion kilometers from Earth, and will remain in use while the team continues its troubleshooting. However, the team didn't want to risk sending another signal to the X-band transmitter and triggering the fault protection system again. So instead, a command was sent to the S-band transmitter on October 22nd. 2 days later, on October 24th, the team was finally able to reconnect with Voyager 1. Now the team will investigate what may have triggered the spacecraft's fault protection system in the first place, given Voyager 1 should have had ample power to operate the heater. However, it may be weeks before operators identify the underlying issue, according to the statement. Voyager 1, which launched in 1977, ventured into interstellar space in 2012, becoming the first spacecraft to cross the boundary of our solar system. Its time in deep space has taken a toll on its instruments and caused an increasing number of technical issues. Earlier this year, the team had to fix a separate communications glitch that was causing the spacecraft to transmit gibberish. While the spacecraft's advanced age and distance from the Earth can make maintenance challenging, Voyager 1 continues to return vital data from beyond the solar system.
Results are published and the numbers are in, and they paint a picture of a very active 2024 ARRL Field Day. With all the details on this year's Field Day, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
Nearly 1.3 million contacts were reported during the 24-hour period. That is up from 2023's 1.25 million contacts, and that's likely indicative of the continued rise of Solar Cycle 25 leading up to the event, but more people also participated this year. Entries were received from all 85 ARRL and Radio Amateurs of Canada RAC sections, as well as from 27 different countries from outside the U.S. and Canada. It is encouraging to see a rise in participation this year, said ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE. ARRL Field Day is amateur radio's premier event, and the hams turned out for it. Field Day is whatever you make it. For some participants, it's a contest. For others, it's a social gathering and club activity. Other groups use Field Day to showcase what amateur radio is all about to the public. Some groups use Field Day as an opportunity to introduce youths to amateur radio. Class A, B, and C scores are included in the 2024 QST results article. The scores for Class D, E, and F stations and club aggregate scores are listed in the 2024 line scores on the web, as well as in the digital edition of QST. It's never too early to start making your plans, though, for 2025 ARRL Field Day. That will be held on June 28th and 29th. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Results are available now at the ARRL Field Day website and in the December issue of QST.
Now, in our 25th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio.
With Dayton Hamvention 2025 set for the weekend of May 16th, the organizers are asking prospective attendees to ponder the question of what radio independence means to them. That is, in fact, the theme of the convention in Xenia, Ohio. In announcing the theme, the Hamvention team say in the course of history radio has been heavily regulated and in some instances banned together. We are fortunate to enjoy these freedoms, and for us at Hamvention, we are proud of our radio independence. What does radio independence mean to you? Hopefully there will be many answers found in the workshops, seminars, and eyeball QSOs at the Greene County Fairgrounds.
A hydrogen balloon from Arizona has ended its months of silence with transmissions that were picked up by a ground station in Antarctica. Many months after it marked its first anniversary of orbiting the Earth, the WB6RER Pico balloon was spotted over the Antarctic. Germany's Antarctic station, Neumayer 3, DPGVN/1, provided the good news following a period of concern when the balloon appeared to have gone silent for 5 months. The spot by the Antarctic Scientific Research Station showed that the balloon was flying at an altitude of 45,735 feet, with its solar panel measuring 3.88 volts. Weighing 11 grams, the hydrogen gas-filled balloon was launched in May of 2023 from Golden Valley, Arizona. One of its greatest challenges during its year in orbit has been to overcome damage to its 20-meter dipole antenna.
As AO7, launched on November 15, 1974, approaches its 50th anniversary and sets a record for the longest operating satellite, we look back at a few of its noteworthy accomplishments. The downlink spectrum of AO7's UHF and VHF transponder overlapped with AO6's VHF to HF transponder. The overlap of the two was approximately 50 kilohertz wide. The two orbits were the same almost. AO7's mean motion was slightly higher than that of AO6, which means once a year or so, AO6 will lap its younger sibling in space. During the time when the two spacecrafts are in close proximity, it was already known to be theoretically possible, if AO7 has its UHF and VHF transponder on, for one user to communicate through two spacecraft in succession, with the downlink of AO7's transponder being relayed through AO6's VHF-HF transponder uplink, and then with the doubly relayed signal arriving on 29.5 megahertz to another user on the ground. This could be done in certain geometries in both directions, making a two-way double-hop communications possible. The first successful Earth-Space-Space-Earth relay of this type took place on January 6, 1975. This happened early in AO7's first lifetime, and during the first occasion when AO6 approached AO7 in their very similar orbits. The two stations were both located in the state of Texas, one in Dallas and one in Richardson. This method of communications was also conducted and reported by 55 other user stations from 12 countries during 1975. These events were documented in the IEEE proceedings in October of 1975.
According to Radio World, Brendan Carr says the Federal Communications Commission should stop work now on controversial issues until after Donald Trump returns to the White House in January. Carr is considered by many to be the leading candidate to succeed Democrat Jessica Rosenworcel as the chair of the FCC. "I want to congratulate President Trump on his historic election victory," he said in a post on X. "The American people have sent a clear and decisive message to Washington. It is time to change course. That is why I agree with congressional leadership that the FCC should immediately stop work on any partisan or controversial matter and focus on the transition. When the transition is complete, the FCC will have an important role to play in reining in big tech, ensuring that broadcasters operate in the public interest and unleashing economic growth while advancing our national security interests and supporting law enforcement. The FCC can and must deliver results for the American people," he said.
Federal Communications Commission Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel has launched a new podcast aimed at highlighting historic inventors and innovators, both inside and outside the telecommunications world. For every historic first, there are always people who came before them, who cleared the path and made it easier for the others to follow and go even further, Rosenworcel said. That's the virtuous cycle and what this podcast speaker series aimed to uncover. Rosenworcel's podcast, titled First Conversations, is a 9-part speaker series focusing on leaders in telecommunications history and elsewhere. The podcast's first guest is Bill Kennard, the first African-American to serve as FCC chairman. Other notable speakers will include documentarian Ken Burns, AI Safety Institute Director Elizabeth Kelly, and Dr. Carla Hayden, the first woman and African-American to serve as a Librarian of Congress. Podcast episodes will be available online at the FCC's website and can be streamed on Apple.
The ARRL November Sweepstakes is this weekend. Here with more details on this popular event is John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
ARRL November Sweepstakes phone is this weekend. The weather may be turning cold, but the contest and band conditions are hot. With the resounding success of the ARRL November Sweepstakes CW just behind us, this weekend it's time for the phone segment of the event. The ARRL November Sweepstakes phone weekend is November 16th to the 18th. The contest begins at 2100 hours UTC Saturday and runs through 0259 UTC on Monday, giving competitive radio amateurs a good period of fun contesting. The objective of ARRL November Sweepstakes is to support amateur self-training in radio communications, including improving amateur operating skills, conducting technical investigations, and intercommunicating with other amateurs. The contest really puts your skills as an operator to test, said ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE. Stations in the United States and Canada will try to talk to as many other stations in those areas as possible and to copy the exchanges correctly. It can get challenging many hours in, he said. The challenge is what gets many stations excited about sweeps. There is honor to earn and plaques to take home. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARRL is pleased to award a November Sweepstakes plaque to the overall and division leaders in each category, thanks to ICOM America, who is the 2024 principal award sponsor of the plaques and certificates, and the clubs and individuals who also sponsor some of the plaques.
Recently, Singapore's Energy Market Authority granted Sun Cable conditional approval for its transmission line with Australia. Singapore has been faced for years now with the dilemma that its population's energy needs keep increasing every year after year, while it has very little space to build out its energy-producing infrastructure, at least of all renewables with their massive footprint. This has left Singapore virtually completely dependent on natural gas burning for their material needs. With no nearby countries to obtain excess power from, as common in the European Union's integrated energy market, an idea was floated in 2020 by Australian company Sun Cable for the project, called the Australia-Asia Power Link. This would entail 2 transmission lines, the 800-kilometer-long Darwin link to a yet-to-be-built multi-gigawatt 1,200-hectare solar farm in the Barkly region of the Northern Territory of Australia. This link would be rated for 4 gigawatts of transmission capability. The 4,300-kilometer-long Singapore Link HVDC line from Darwin to Singapore is rated for 2 gigawatts, or 1.75 gigawatts after line loss. The current planning for the whole Sun Cable project is set for completion in 2035, with construction yet to begin on all components. While there are still many uncertainties to be resolved, the 1.75 gigawatts that would be provided 24/7 to Singapore would have to be backed up by significant grid-level storage on both sides, which is not an easy problem to solve. If completed, it would be the world's longest electricity transmission line.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I have an announcement I'd like to share with you just to get started. The Southwest Ohio DX Association, otherwise known as SWDEXA, in conjunction with ICOM America, is announcing a program to recognize and reward amateur radio operators who have played a key role in helping other radio operators achieve DXCC. The purpose of this program is not to bring recognition to those that achieve DXCC, but rather to recognize those amateurs that assist others in achieving their first 100 confirmed entities. There is an application form and a judging committee staffed by SWDEXA representatives and a representative from both the Northern California DX Foundation and the International DX Association, NCDXF and INDEXA. Those amateurs receiving the mentoring must be under 30 years of age during the calendar year for the award. The intent of targeting this audience is to attract and retain those amateurs that are most likely to remain engaged in the hobby after achieving DXCC. SWDEXA is uniquely positioned to bestow this award at the annual SWDEXA DX Dinner. The DX Dinner, held annually in conjunction with the Dayton Hamvention, is arguably the largest gathering of active DXers in the world. We present the DXpedition of the Year Award, the DXpeditioner of the Year Award when applicable, and host the DX Forum. CQ Magazine announces their DX Hall of Fame inductees at the DX Dinner as well. As a technology leader in our hobby, there are no better partners to promote and celebrate this award than ICOM. Ray, N9JA, has been a constant promoter of ham radio, even coining the phrase, quote, "for the love of ham radio," end quote. ICOM has selflessly supported amateur radio over the years and is taking this opportunity to promote the mentors of DX. Thank you to ICOM for their support. If you have a question or you'd like to try to submit a entry form, please send an email to me, thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll help you out. Often people ask me if there's a written copy of the information that I present. There are so many call signs, dates, and URLs being discussed, you could never remember them until such time as you could write them down. I use most of the same data that you hear in the DX Corner for the weekly DX column in the Ohio Section Journal. If you just Google, quote, ARRL Ohio Section, you will find the Ohio Section website, and you can subscribe to the weekly journal and get most of this information. The actual website is arrl-ohio.org. This is a free journal, and you don't need to be an ARRL member to receive it. You won't get the well-rounded information that you get from the This Week in Amateur Radio podcast, but you will get the DX information. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll take care of it for you. Our first update is on the Sierra 9 Zulu DXpedition to São Tomé and Príncipe, which is QRV through November the 20th. The hot, tired, jet-lagged S9 Zulu team has been on the air for over 24 hours. They've frankly been up for a couple days now. The equatorial heat and humidity is almost unbearable for those not accustomed to it, so setup, especially antenna work, has been slower than we had hoped. The good news is that the propagation is amazing on the higher bands, and we're trying to maximize our QSO rates there. We have had sporadic power failures which affect the club log real-time uploads. If you don't see your QSO in club's log search, please work us again. Of course, our QSL manager will handle discrepancies for you after we complete operations. If you have confirmed S9 previously, please stand by a bit to allow us to work those DXers who are usually among those battling for that all-time new one. Visit the S9 Zulu website for full details. Thank you in 7-3 from the S9 Zulu team. I've spent some time listening to them, especially the sideband guys. They are really are a good group of guys, and they're really doing the job. So I hope you get a chance to listen and to work them. Our second update is on the VK9 CV DXpedition to Cocos Keeling. Last weekend was full of contests, so we found it harder to find space to operate, they said. Quote, we mainly used the WARC bands. The call sign VK9CV was also active in the WAE RIDI contest, where Grant made several hundred contacts. He is also doing well using the good conditions on 6 meters, making contacts as far as the Caribbean. Currently, he has 47 DXCC 6-meter entities in his log. We are also trying to work on the lower bands with Miro OM5RW on 80 meters and Lubo OM5 Zulu Whiskey on 160, monitoring the bands all night, calling CQ every half hour on 1840 kilohertz. There is a multinational DXpedition headed to Sierra Leone as 9 Lima 5 Alpha, November 27th through December 8th. Fox 2 DX Patrick says that the team plans to be on 160 through 6 meters with 6 stations plus 1 satellite station, all running on generator power. Patrick says that they will emphasize what he calls, quote, the human modes, CW and sideband. The group's logo features a pygmy hippopotamus found in only 4 African countries, including Sierra Leone. Says Patrick, quote, it's an endangered species, a bit like us. JG8NQJ Taki is going back to work on Minami Torishima starting in mid-November and until early March of 2025. This is a work assignment, and he will be QRV as JG8NQJ/JD1 in his spare time, usually during his mornings before he goes to work. JD1/M is number 32 on Club Log's DXCC Most Wanted list. QSL via the Bureau or direct to JA8CJY, as well as LOTW and EQSL. My friend Delta Lima 2 Alpha Whiskey Golf, Gunter, is leading a 5-person international team to Christmas Island as VK9XU February 18th to March 4th, 2025, and then on to Cocos Keeling, hopefully as VK9CU, March 4th to the 11th. I know that seems like a long way off, but it's only 4 months. Joining Gunter, who's the DXpedition, will be an experienced group of operators. They will have 3 stations QRV 24/7 on 160 through 6 meters, not including 60 meters. The team will be on CW, sideband, RIDI, and FT8. QSOs will be uploaded to Club Log during the operation and to LOTW 3 months after the DXpedition. And you can QSL both of those to DL2AWG. The team planning to go to St. Martin as Tango Oscar 9 Whiskey met to go over all plans for radios, antennas, and computers. Some equipment has already been packed. Like most locations, local noise due to LED lighting has been increasing even in our hilltop locations. We have a new multi-band receiving antenna and receive multi-coupler so all radios can take advantage of it. The receive antenna will be located about 200 feet from the station. As planned, we will have 3 stations available for the 4 operators, plus a 4th station that will be dedicated to monitoring 6 meters in case of openings. 3 team members arrive late on November 30th and the 4th operator on December 3rd. Members of the Charlie Queen DX gang, Kilo Hotel Zero Delta, and the Northern Mariana International Amateur Radio Club, November Hotel Zero Echo, will be teaming up with a group of Japanese hands to operate from Saipan in the Mariana Islands from 1400 Zulu on November 28th to 2000 Zulu on December 3rd. They will have 2 stations running simultaneously approximately 3 miles apart to avoid QRMing each other. Activity will be on sideband, CW, FT8, and FT4 on 160 through 6 meters. Equipment will include an Elecraft K3 with an ALS 500 amplifier and an FTDX10 with a DXV 600L. They will use a vertical antennas and hex beams. Someone has been pirating the call E30NA on FT8. These bogus reports were on 12, 17, 20, and 40 meters. The real E30NA was back in the fall of 2001 by DL5NAM Chris. Don't bother working or trying to get a QSL for these recent infractions. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.
Coming up next, This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history. Coming up right after station identification here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
Keeping the amateur radio community informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at www.twiar.net.
Welcome to the 21st segment of Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. A tip of the TWIAR hat to Chris Cordella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the preparation of these programs. Now, here's the next chapter of Ham Radio History. Naval Maneuvers. Despite the political and regulatory control disputes between amateurs and the Secretary, the Navy well understood how much it had benefited from all the trained amateurs ready to volunteer for service during the war and the likelihood of needing them again someday. In August, the Navy announced it would begin broadcasting test messages containing weather information and text for code copying practice at 15 and 25 words per minute every night on 476 meters from NAJ, the Great Lakes Station, in order to maintain the interest of the radio amateurs and keep them in operating practice. The messages would be broadcast using a simple encoding, with the code ID number being sent first. Presumably this was the practice in decoding messages, but probably also to promote accurate copying without the benefit of context and word prediction. The Navy also asked the League for suggestions on how this might work better, a good sign of intended cooperation coming from a former antagonist in Congress. R.H.G. Matthews, who had served in the Navy during the war and was now ARRL Vice President, cited the historically tense relationship in his reply. The average amateur has always been a little afraid of the Navy, partly because he was not as well acquainted with it as he might have been, and partly because it was not as well acquainted with him and his uses as it could have been. But its inaction speaking louder than its words, the Navy had as yet done nothing to reopen amateur operation. In the August editorials, the lid referred not to a poor operator, but the one clamped down by the government on amateurs' operations. After getting hopes up for a planned August 1 lifting, and ARRL having drafted an editorial to that effect, the Navy declared the lid would not come off after all until the President had officially declared a state of peace. Of course, such a declaration would also mean the Navy would no longer be entitled to control the amateurs anyway. In other words, the Navy can let us start any time now, but refuses to until they can no longer prevent it, wrote Warner, and he speculated that amateurs may have to wait even longer for the Senate to ratify the President's declaration. Meanwhile, the Department of Commerce outlined its policy for amateur radio after resumption of operation. 1. All licenses have expired and everyone will have to be retested, this time at an increased code speed of 10 words per minute instead of 5. 2. A separate application for station license must follow the construction of a station. However, expecting of a flood of new applications, the department would allow operation to begin upon simply submitting a station license application. 3. Call letters would be issued from scratch, old ones no longer existed,
and it would not be possible to get them back. But then, in contradiction, they stated that if someone wanted his old call, he could apply for it and, if it remained unissued, could wait until that call came up in sequence. It wasn't quite clear who would do the waiting. 4. The department would not be issuing very many special licenses, which would be more restricted than before the war because of the anticipated increase of marine and air traffic. Our heart is heavy, friends, over this delay in getting back on the brass, but we know it will be only a short while yet, and then the days of real sport, wrote Warner. A draft of a new radio bill emerged in Congress on 28 August, proposing to repeal the 1912 law. This time it provided for various classes of service, including amateurs, but placed regulation under the authority of a technical radio committee, which would have a member from each department of government, instead of laying out such regulations explicitly in the bill itself. This would place governance of amateur activity in the hands of a committee without public hearings or other recourse should they decide to regulate amateurs out of existence. Although the bill recognized amateur radio explicitly, it was still clearly unacceptable. As fall arrived, full 10 months after the armistice, mounting impatience led ARRL to investigate the lack of action in Washington. They discovered there was more to the issue than simply waiting for official peace to break out. Yet another proposed bill appeared, this one authorizing the Navy to use its stations for commercial purposes. At the same time, Navy Secretary Daniels wrote to both houses of Congress asking them to further consider establishing a commission to study the radio problems, authorize the President to define wavelength bands for different classes of work, give the Navy monopoly over ship-to-shore and intercontinental radio, authorize the Navy to use its stations commercially, and assist companies in developing radio. In response, the Senate Committee on Naval Affairs asked the Navy to draft legislation for its consideration, while in the House the Committee on Merchant Marine and Fisheries was also taking up the matter. The ARRL expressed alarm that there was no mention of amateur radio at all in this exchange, distrusting the Navy because of its previous attempts to eliminate amateur radio. And since the reopening was being delayed personally by the Secretary of the Navy, with no stated reason given, the League suspected that they wanted to push through a bill before losing control under the current law. This time, however, the Navy expressed sympathy for the amateurs and a desire to eliminate the distrust. While the League viewed the lack of any mention of amateur radio as non-threatening per se, it took the position that such an omission would leave amateurs in legislative limbo and made it clear that any new bill must explicitly define amateur radio status. The Office of Naval Communications reacted by inviting the League to express its views on how amateur radio ought to be recognized in the new law. The Board of Direction would formulate a response and arrange for League representation at the congressional hearings. There was still no lifting of the transmitting ban in sight. Assistant Secretary of the Navy Franklin Delano Roosevelt assured the League that he would personally radio Mr. Daniels about it, not telephone, telegraph, or write him, mind you, and amateurs might hope to know their status soon. Warner commented that the whole proposition is so basically unjust, so uncalled for, that we do not believe it will long obtain. This seems to be an entirely different matter from the question of a Navy monopoly on commercial radio, and we see no reason why we should be compelled to await the ratification of the treaty, an act that from present appearances might be judged to be several months off. Members were urged to appeal to their representatives.
A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Across the border in Canada, the ban had already been lifted on 1 May, and lots of activity was starting up there. Canadian hams were regulated in wavelength according to their proximity to a government station, 50 meters if within 5 miles, 100 meters within 25 miles, 150 meters within 75 miles, and half a kilowatt maximum primary transformer input power. Before the war, Canadian three-letter call signs starting with X were issued, but now they would begin with numbers as they were in the U.S. A correspondent reported in QST that when war had broken out and the ban went into effect, the police in Canada took the additional step of confiscating essential parts of amateur stations. Hams had reacted by actively trying to hand over comparatively worthless substitutions, such as an old loading coil, to avoid confiscation, believing they would otherwise never again see their parts. Daniels Only Knows was the answer to why hams in the U.S. were not yet opened up and back on the air, according to an October editorial. It was another jab at the Secretary of the Navy, who was the only person standing between amateurs and their transmitters. The ARRL managed to get a resolution introduced in Congress requesting the Secretary to provide reasons why the ban had not been lifted. In the operating department, Smith took his own shot at Daniels, calling the continued reasonless ban autocratic and un-American, and in Strays, a one-line entry poked, "Ain't nature wonderful? Just look at Sec Daniels." Even the old man got a word in. Not so rotten was his compliment for the author of an article about non-synchronous spark gaps in the September issue. TOM bade him to live long and prosper, nearly 50 years before Spock would trademark the phrase. He extolled the virtues of his own rotary gap, Old Betsy, never having seen a better set, but now thought this one might have her beat. He ended with his own jab at the Navy for being late in lifting the ban. "Don't our folks know the war is over?" he asked, suggesting somebody send a postal to the Navy and let them know it was all over months ago. "I am an American, and I want my liberty the same as the Canadians have theirs." H.C. Goller, the New England radio inspector, wrote to answer a question he'd received from droves of amateurs, specifically, "What's the future of amateur radio?" He first expressed belief that amateurs would be largely self-regulating. Amateurs who had left for the war as boys were returning as men, expecting to be operating a more sophisticated set of gear with a more sophisticated way of thinking about radio and operating. He used wooden to describe the old childish ways and Bakelite for the modern. Are these men, having done their bit with Bakelite sets, going back to the wooden sets of their childhood in the radio game? No, they are not. They are going to have Bakelite amateur radio activity. Wooden operators, wooden apparatus, and anything else wooden in the game will either be taboo or else be made to look like the real thing, and the kids of yesterday will accomplish these results by their influence much better than the laws would. While it would be surprising today, it was not unusual to find a government official, in this case Goller, writing a letter to QST to address amateurs while also joining as a member. He well remembered the response of volunteers when the war first began, and believed that only by effective organization could amateurs be of service. The government was also wiser now as a result of this, and amateurs therefore should not worry about what it would do in the years ahead. His advice was to organize and improve. The government could not afford to do without the amateurs. Included in this material are quotes from the following: Navy starts amateur tests. QST, August 1919, page 11. The Lid, editorial, QST, August 19, page 13. The Amateur Situation, QST, September 1919, page 5. Our Canadian Cousins, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, September 1919, page 27. Daniels Only Knows, editorial, QST, October 1919, page 11. The Old Man, Not So Rotten, QST, October 1919, page 7. H.C. Goller, Communications by the Amateurs, QST, October 1919, page 26. With appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
An FCC plan that would mandate radio and TV broadcast transparency about AI content in political advertising on their stations has met with resistance along party lines. The Commission's senior Republican, who is seen by many as the replacement to the current Democratic FCC chair, Jessica Rosenworcel, is leading the opposition against the proposal. The Democrats on the Commission support the FCC's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, which does not seek to restrict or ban actual content in the ads and focuses only on disclosure about the use of AI. The senior Republican, Brendan Carr, is leading the charge against the measure. Carr, who received his FCC appointment during Donald Trump's previous administration, said such controversial moves by the FCC should be stalled until the new administration is in place. The FCC has received public comments on this proposal, and a spokesman said it is now in the process of reviewing them. No announcements have been made about the next steps.
It has often been reported that the oldest satellites still working in space are the space probes Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. The Voyagers were both launched in 1977 to take advantage of the planetary alignment called, back then, the Grand Tour. Their images changed the human vision of our solar system. But are they really the oldest, still functional spacecraft in outer space? What if we include spacecraft that remain behind in Earth orbit? Is it even believable that the oldest still working satellite in space wasn't even designed or operated by NASA, USAF, ESA, or any other space agency? What if this satellite was designed by radio amateurs and the final assembly occurred in a basement laboratory not far from the Goddard Space Flight Center? Then, all things considered, AO7, a small sat launched on November 15, 1974, is the oldest working satellite and is still providing service to hundreds of amateur radio operators around the world. In its first life, AO7 lived a very healthy lifetime of 6.5 years. Not to overstate the case, AO7 outlived both its commercial and government co-passengers launched by Delta 104. In late 1980, AO7's poor, abused NiCad battery began to show serious signs of increased series resistance. This was a sure sign to AMSAT command stations that the end was in sight. The cells had been originally matched for capacity by NASA, and indeed, the cells all failed within a matter of weeks of one another. AO7 stayed asleep for 21 years to the nearest month. Then one day, 807 woke up again. This is only possible if something caused an open circuit in the battery. A very active user of AO7, Pat Gowan, G3IOR, from the UK, made a telephone call to Perry Klein, W3PK, the first AMSAT president and designer of the VHF-HF transponder. This was on June 21, 2002. Pat wondered if we had launched a new low-Earth orbit spacecraft. He was hearing Morse code telemetry again on the old beacon frequency of AO7. He played Perry a tape recording. It sure sounded like AO7 telemetry. Many radio amateurs who were satellite enthusiasts very quickly began to observe the signals from AO7, and the second life of the Sleeping Beauty of satellites began. Over the next 3 weeks in November, AMSAT News Service will honor this historic achievement with a series of short articles highlighting the life of AMSAT Oscar 7. In the meantime, be sure to visit a special page on the AMSAT website where you will find a collection of AO7 articles.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The hobby of amateur radio is one of experimentation and change. For decades, this came in the form of circuit diagrams, components, and scrounged hardware from anything that wasn't bolted down. New functionality came with the aid of a soldering iron. More recently, functionality comes from participation in the global electronics market, where you can buy any radio you like and have it shipped to your door within hours at an unbeatable price. Mind you, buying all those unbelievably cheap radios does start adding up, and if you want to use more sophisticated hardware, that too is possible, at a price, somewhere between $50 and a new Porsche. Whilst that's an option for some, for the rest of us, there are better and cheaper ways. Of course, it doesn't stop there. If you connect any radio to a computer, you can use whatever software you like to encode and decode any signal you can imagine. With a traditional radio connected to a computer, you can make it participate in hundreds of different so-called digital modes. Before I continue, let's look at a radio in a slightly different way. Consider an antenna as a continuous source of voltages that are amplified, filtered and demodulated in some way by a radio. You can think of the combination of antenna, radio and computer as a stream decoder. To decode a signal in a new way requires a new decoder, which you could build from components or, as I've said, buy online. During the week I've continued experimenting with GNU Radio. If you're unfamiliar, it's a toolkit that allows you to build so-called flow graphs that can process a signal stream. Think of it as a box of Lego that you can put together to build any type of decoder. Let me say that again. Imagine that you want to decode or transmit a mode like FreeDV, M17, APRS, Olivia, Contestia or Hellschreiber. With the GNU Radio Toolkit, all of this is possible, and you won't need to buy new hardware or bust out the soldering iron every time you want to experiment with a new mode. If you have been playing with digital modes already, you'll likely point out that you can already do this today by using software running on a computer, and that's true. What that doesn't tell you is that this comes with a very specific limitation. Namely, that all those modes require that they fit inside a single audio channel, because all those digital modes you might be familiar with are essentially using an SSB or FM signal with the audio generated or decoded by a computer. Even if you have a modern radio, like for example an ICOM IC7300, you'll still be limited in what modes of transmission you can make. ICOM limits the transmit bandwidth to 2.9 kHz. Flex radio appears to double that to 7.9 kHz, but numbers are sketchy. The point remains, most current amateur radio technology is based around the notion that a mode essentially fits within a single audio channel, and a very narrow one at that. So why does this matter? If you run out of FT8 space on a band, right now you need to change to an alternate frequency to play, but you'll only be able to see the stations that are using the same alternate frequency, as long as they fit within the bandwidth of an audio signal. If you wanted to check out the main frequency, you'd have to change frequencies and keep switching back and forth. Using this idea, monitoring all of FT4, FT8, Whisper and all CW beacons, all at the same time, becomes unimaginable, not to mention costly, if you needed a radio for each band and each mode. What if you wanted to use another mode that took more than about 4 kHz, like say a 5 MHz wide DVB-T signal, which you could be experimenting with on 70 centimeters? Or what if you'd like to compare a repeater input with its output at the same time? Or compare two repeaters together? Or find the best band to operate on right now? The point being that there are things that simply don't fit within a single audio channel that you won't be able to play with using a traditional radio. As it happens, that too is a solved problem. Remember that I mentioned that you can think of an antenna, radio and computer combination as a stream decoder? What if I told you that an SDR, a software-defined radio, is essentially a device that translates antenna voltages into numbers, which you can process with GNU Radio? Whilst that does imply replacing your radio, you don't have to jump in at the deep end to start playing, and even if you do decide to buy new hardware, you can get your toes wet with all manner of self-build or commercial kits. Even better, you can start with the gear you already have today and become familiar with GNU Radio, and when you're ready to expand your station, you can add in an SDR and continue to use the same tools to experiment. Not only that, you can do interesting things by combining what you already have. Consider, for example, the idea of using an RTL SDR as the receiver with a traditional radio as the transmitter. You could decode all of the FT8 signals on a band and transmit where there was space to do so. The point being that you can do this one step at a time. Every time you download or build another GNU radio flow graph, you can have a new decoder, and as time goes on, you'll be able to decide what hardware you might want to pair it with. To be clear, I'm talking about the gradual change from component-based radio using audio interfaces into software-based radio. It's not like we haven't done this before. Anyone recall spark gaps? Or valves? The future of experimentation is bright, and it's filled with bits. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
A microsatellite jointly developed by Chinese and Russian universities was successfully launched this past Tuesday morning from Blagoveshchensk, Russia, representing a significant step in international academic collaboration. Weighing approximately 15.7 kilograms, ARSTU-1, a 12U CubeSat, will serve multiple purposes, including verifying micro-nano-satellite technology, supporting amateur radio technology experiments, and enhancing space science education, according to the Harbin Institute of Technology, one of the primary developers. The satellite contains an FM transponder, which is currently operational with an uplink of 145.850 MHz with a 67 Hz CTC-SS tone, and a downlink on 435.400 MHz. After the repeater detects the end of the uplink, it will wait for a half second. If no new uplink is in that time frame, telemetry will be sent. So make fast QSOs so the telemetry is less likely to interrupt you. The satellite also contains 2 cameras with an SSDV downlink for low-resolution images on 436.210 MHz and a high-speed downlink on 10,460.00 MHz for high-resolution images. The project brings together resources from Chinese and Russian universities, including HIT, Nanjing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, Amur State University, and Brauman Moscow State Technical University. This initiative aims to promote higher education cooperation and foster cultural exchange between the youth of both nations. According to Cao Zhan, Deputy Director of HIT's International Cooperation Department, the satellite was primarily developed by students, with more than 50 students involved in various stages of the project, most of whom were undergraduates when they joined. The HIT-led student team had substantial independence in project management and technical decisions, supported by university-provided resources and expert faculty advisors. The school provided us with an experienced team of faculty advisors, ample experimental resources, research and development funding, and granted our student team full autonomy over technical decisions, command, and management, said Zhang Zhiyao, a doctoral student at the School of Astronautics at HIT and a research team member. For students like Fang Kanchbo, an undergraduate at the School of Electronic and Information Technology, the project provided hands-on experience directly linked to classroom theory. Standing at the launch site, counting down to liftoff, I felt like the theories I'd learned in class were coming to life, said Fang. This semester, I started studying communications principles. During the launch, we ensured each command was transmitted and executed precisely, and the telemetry data we received reflected the satellite status. From countdown to orbit, the communication system was vital at every stage.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. As this edition of the ARRL Audio News is released, AO7 will be 50 years young. I have to say that because it has lasted so long to this point. Maybe we will get another 50 years out of it. AO7 was part of a very interesting QSO back in 1975, January 6th to be exact. Only a few months after AO7 was launched, AO7 in its UHF-VHF mode was within the footprint of AO6's VHF-HF transponder. The call signs of those making this very rare contact are not known. The contact is called Earth to Space to Earth, and they were located in Dallas, Texas and Richardson, Texas. They were able to make a contact with one ham on AO7 and the other on AO6. During that year, when mutual footprints occurred, 55 other stations from 12 countries made such a contact. These contacts were documented in the October 1975 IEEE proceedings. These types of contacts are fun, amazing, and rarely happen. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's solar weather and propagation forecast. Brought to us each week by solar prognosticator Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. Only 5 new sunspot groups emerged this week. The first was on November 7th, the next one emerged on November 9th, 2 more on November 11th, and another on November 13th. The average daily sunspot number declined from 193.4 to 141.6, while average daily solar flux went from 248.4 to 203.7. So looking at the predicted solar flux values for the near term, it will be 145 on November 15th and 16th, 155 on November 17th and 18th, then 145, 150, 200, 235, 240, 255 and 260 on November 19th through the 25th. Looking now at the estimated planetary A index for the near term, it will be 8 and 12 on November 16th and 17th, 8 on November 18th and 19th, 5 on November 20th through the 24th. Then hold at 10 on November 25th and 26th.
In Radio Sport this week, more great contests. On November 15th, it's the NCCC FT4 Sprint, that's digital. Also on November 15th, the weekly RIDI test, that's digital as well. November 15th, the NCC Sprint, and that's CW. November 16th and 17th, the ARRL EME contest, CW phone and digital. November 16th and 17th, the LZDX contest, that's CW and phone. November 16th as well, the All-Austrian 160-meter contest, that's CW. November 16th, the REF 160-meter contest, that's CW. And November 16th through the 17th, the South American Integration Contest, that's CW. November 16th, the 50 Feld-Held Sprint, that's digital. And also on November 16th, the RSGP 1.8 megahertz contest, that is CW. And then, of course, on November 16th through the 18th, the ARRL November Sweepstakes, that's single sideband phone. Remember, you can visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on December 13th and 14th. It's the Tampa Bay Hamfest sponsoring the ARRL West Central Florida Section Convention. That's in Plant City, Florida. January 4th, Ham Radio University sponsoring the ARRL New York City Long Island Section Convention in Brookville, New York. January 10th through the 11th, the 2025 Southwest Florida Regional Hamfest sponsoring the ARRL Southern Florida Section Convention. That's in Fort Myers, Florida. And on January 17th and 18th, it's the Cowtown Hamfest 25, sponsoring the ARRL North Texas Section Convention. That's in Forest Hills, Texas. And also remember, you can search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find events in your area.
The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is growing next year, and a number of social media users and stars are coming together to help it happen. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
The ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology is growing next year, and a number of social media stars are coming together to help it happen. On Saturday, November 30th, the live fundraiser telethon is set to take place on the Ham Radio Crash Course YouTube channel. Host John Nash, KI6NAZ, will be joined by several web-famous hams to talk radio and raise money. The proceeds benefit the ARRL Education and Technology Fund, which is what pays for the Teachers Union, TI. There is skin in the game. Several donors created a challenge with a $20,000 pledge. The donor challenge will be unlocked when the others step up and give during this year's telethon, said ARRL Director of Development Kevin Beal, K8EAL. It really shows the value hams place on inspiring and educating the next generation of radio amateurs. They're going to be the engineers that lead our world forward, and ham radio is a solid foundation for wireless technology, he said. All of the funding for the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology comes from donations. In the last 3 years, 175 educators have graduated TI. There were 7 cohorts of the program in 2024. There are 16 planned for 2025, including taking the Institute on the road to different cities around the country. The goal is to have 300 teachers in 2025, exceeding the combined total of the last 3 years. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA, will join NAS on the telephone. He'll share success stories from the last several years and answer questions about the program. We're seeing real success, and it's great to have an opportunity to tell the stories that come out of enabling these educators, he said.
A draft report about the 2020 collapse that led to the dismantling of the Arecibo Observatory's 305-meter telescope has pinpointed what is believed to be the root cause. A pre-publication document from the National Academies made available to the public online said that investigators found unprecedented and accelerated long-term zinc creep-induced failure. In other words, the failure occurred in the radio telescope's cable sockets, vital components that were designed to support the 900-ton platform that was above the dish. The data analysis was conducted by the University of Central Florida and the National Science Foundation. The telescope's construction occurred between 1960 and 1963. Investigators believe that the sequence of events leading to the collapse may have begun with Hurricane Maria, which hit the telescope as a Category 4 in 2017. The report noted that inspections before the storm found the zinc leading edge to be intact, but in late 2018 and early 2019, cable slippage was detected.
A science education center at the site of the former Arecibo radio telescope is delaying its much-awaited opening to the public. Following a pilot program held this summer that opened its doors to students and educators by invitation only, the Scientific Education and Research Center at the site of the former Arecibo Observatory has had its opening delayed until the new year. The National Science Foundation facility in Puerto Rico is known as the Arecibo Center for Culturally Relevant and Inclusive Science Education, Computational Skills, and Community Engagement, or NCF Arecibo C3. It was originally scheduled to open in November. Center administrators said the delay would provide more time for the transport of essential equipment and preparation to make the facility more accessible. One of C3's original collaborators, Universidad del Sagrado Corazon, recently ended its involvement with the center, expressing pride in its first year of work with others on the team. The university's provost and vice president for academic affairs said in a statement, "These partnerships and structures have now been successfully initiated, and the remaining institutions involved in the project will continue this important work." The National Science Foundation announcement said the delayed opening to the public will also allow adjustments in C3's organizational structure. Opening day is expected to coincide with the National Science Foundation's 75th anniversary. The goal of the center is to provide a place for STEM education and research that honors the historic Arecibo Observatory, which was dismantled after its collapse in 2020.
Serving the amateur radio community for a quarter century, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, heard around the world on the amateur bands and streaming on the Internet.
Peter Young, VK3MV, has given much to amateur radio over the decades. Most recently, he has given his name to an award that was created by the International Amateur Radio Union to recognize excellence among young radio operators. Hams under the age of 25 will be chosen as recipients by the IARU's Administrative Council, and special attention will be given to those who showed particular promise in many of the Youth on the Air programs. This award is called the Peter Young VK3MV IARU Youth Excellence Award because it draws its inspiration from Peter's volunteer contributions as well as his professional achievements in radio communications, most recently in Southern Australia. Peter's varied volunteer involvement includes participation with the 2005 review of the amateur radio service with the Wireless Institute of Australia, which he served as a member of the board until 2012. Peter was also the IARU Region 3 Monitoring System Coordinator from September 2011 to June 2014. In his career, he is an award winner himself. In 2008, he received the Jonathan Livingston Award from the Australia Radio Communication Industry Association for years of excellence in the industry. He is also an honorary life member of the Wireless Institute of Australia.
When you fire up your transceiver, get ready and get on the air as a youth operator team take on the challenges offered by Rotuma Island. You can listen to the pile-ups as a young generation of operators calls QRZ as 3D2Y. The strong presence of youthful operators is a hallmark of the Rotuma Island DXpedition, which is on the air from November 15th through the 4th of December. The Pacific Islands DXpedition Group has sent a team to the South Pacific Island, including Greg, W6, IZT, Dean, W2FQ, and Nathan, K4, NHW. The other half of the on-island team comprises Jamie, M0SDV, and Connor, KD9 LSV, who are both 24, and Lucas, LY7J, who is 22. The team's operation is from the beach on the island's north side. At the same time, young operators in shacks around the world will be calling QRZ to get their first sampling of what it's like to be on the end of a DXpedition pile-up. The activation's remote component will be handled by Youth on the Air hams from their stations in Turkey, South Korea, Canada, France, and elsewhere. The support team includes Case W0AAE, this year's recipient of the ARRL's prestigious Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Award and the Amateur Radio Newsline Young Ham of the Year for 2023. Case will be coordinating operation of the remote stations, which are set up as next-gen RIBs, self-contained radios in a box that are gaining popularity in a number of recent island DXpeditions.
It is time for AMSAT's weekly satellite shorts from all over, and we begin this week with this short story from AMSAT EA. The organization released a statement on the decay of SO-121, Hades D SO-121. The satellite has re-entered the atmosphere, disintegrating as planned. Many thanks to the ham radio community for your support. We are glad that, even with its low power, many amateurs were able to make voice contacts and had fun receiving its telemetry. Next up comes news that FO-29's batteries are unable to support continuous operation of the analog transponder throughout its orbit after over 28 years. However, the Japan Radio Amateur League continues to turn on the transponder at various times. Operation continues until the satellite's undervoltage control automatically turns off the transponder. And our final story this week, your continued collection of telemetry data for MO-122 or MESAT-1 is always appreciated. For the next couple of days, the telemetry beacon on MO-122 will remain at its lowest power level. This puts the signal down a couple of dB, and it's noticeable from the ground. The low signal is a great opportunity to work on improving the sensitivity of your receiving station. The transponder power remains the same. It's strong thanks to AMSAT's LTM or Linear Transponder Module. The satellite remains in good health. Since launch in early July, eclipse periods have increased a good deal, going from about 15 minutes to nearly 29 minutes. At the same time, the orbit has precessed, so the bird appears over populated areas where the transponder gets more use while in eclipse. These conditions mean the battery is getting used more with less time to fully recharge. We keep a watchful eye on the battery and its reported capacity, and when there is an apparent decline, it seems prudent to turn off the transponder for a couple of days to allow recovery.
Broadcasting students at Kent County High School in Wharton, Maryland, extended their reach of their voices beyond their radio station's distance, making contact with people throughout the country and around the globe. Chris Singleton, broadcasting teacher and manager of the high school's radio station 90.5 FM WKHS, introduced students to amateur radio on Monday, October 21st. With an antenna mounted in one of the back parking lots at the high school and less than 100 watts of power, the students made more than 33 contacts, all without the assistance of the internet. It was really cool seeing the students' faces light up when they made their first contact, which reminded me of my own experience with this almost 40 years ago, Singleton said. Amateur radio allows people to connect all around the world via the airwaves. There is no internet, cell tower, or other connections required. While often thought of as more of a hobby, ham radio is also an important means of maintaining communication should disaster strike. During the Amateur Radio Day at Kent County High School, students gathered in a room at the station watching displays and making contacts. "This looks like something out of the Matrix," said one student. Almost every one of the students attempted to call out to other ham radio stations using the K3 ARS call sign, and to their amazement, many stations called back to them from all over the United States, Europe, and beyond, Singleton said. Community member Chris Coate, president of the Kent Amateur Radio Society, and Austin McLean, the society's vice president, helped Singleton and the students throughout the day. Brad Russum of the Kent County Office of Emergency Services and Dave Irby from the Chesapeake College stopped by the broadcasting classroom to see the amateur radio setup. The event appears to have helped generate a new generation of ham radio enthusiasts. The students had so much fun that many have expressed a willingness to commit to taking after-school classes and studying to get their own amateur radio license, Singleton said. You can learn more about the Kent County High School's broadcasting program and WKHS at wkhsradio.org.
Backer 12 is scheduled to launch on November 16th at 0700 Central Africa Time and will be carrying many fun payloads, enabling everyone to participate, from crossband repeaters together with APRS, Whisper, and even slow scan television. This news is obviously wind direction permitting, and all courtesy of the Secunda ARC in South Africa via the SARL. Stewart, ZR-1WT, is flying a Whisper beacon on a circumnavigation balloon, which his hope will eventually land on top of Australia, but until then, he'd really like your help to track it. The Whisper beacon call sign is ZR-1WT on 20 meters, Whisper frequency 14.097020 MHz. Its power is 10 milliwatts, transmitting 2 packets every 10 minutes, the first with its grid locator and the second with temperature, altitude, speed, and PSU voltage. Another payload is SSTV on 433.4 MHz. This ZS6 STN Becker Cube satellite will be transmitting images that contain a quotation. If you are the first person to send through confirmation of the full quotation and its author, you will win a prize. In addition, there will be a special Becker 12 certificate for all those who manage to receive, decode, and send through at least one recognizable UHF SSTV image.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Congratulations to Jim Dalk, W7PB. The broadcast engineer has been honored by the Society of Broadcast Engineers with its Engineer of the Year award named for Robert W. Flanders. The Seattle radio amateur is the only person to have received the Society's recognition twice. He first received the award in 2014. The honor was given earlier this year and reported recently on the website of Radio World. It is presented to an SBE member whose career is marked by excellence and who advances the mission of the SBE. Having spent a lifetime at various broadcast radio and TV stations, Jim continues to be active in the radio industry at age 85. His professional involvement includes assisting the operations of 3 AM stations in the Seattle area. Over the years, his contributions and innovations have included creation of a digital weather display that helps TV weathercasters better show the National Weather Service radar on the air, a feature that was later purchased by some major market TV stations. Jim remains a fervent believer in the value and future of AM broadcast radio, particularly to deliver alerts in times of emergencies. Emergency response is something he knows well. A ham since the age of 14, Jim is active in the Washington State Emergency Management Division.
And just as the ARRL Straight Key Night celebrates that style of traditional mechanical key, the Bug Roundup is a freewheeling festival of mechanical Morse code music, encouraging CW ops to rag, chew, and style using bugs, the semi-automatic key style made famous by Vibroplex. California's Samuel F. Morse Amateur Radio Club, W6SFM, is inviting hams to practice what it is calling homegrown digital music this month. This is a semi-annual 3-day event that the club also holds in May. It is taking place on Saturday, November 16th at 0000 UTC and concludes on Monday, November 18th at the same time. Hams will be calling CQBR, and the exchange will include name, QTH, RST, and of course the model, age, and any other details about the bug you are using.
More funding has been released by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to support ongoing upgrades to the emergency alert systems at U.S. public radio stations. 3 non-commercial radio stations will receive up to $587,000 in funds from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The 3 stations join 38 other public media stations that have already received the awards. The stations are KVPR in Fresno, California, WQLN in Erie, Pennsylvania, and KRCL in Salt Lake City, Utah. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been dispersing $40 million in these grants to eligible broadcasters.
We wrap up our news this week with you imagining life on the road and life on the amateur bands rolled into one great combination. One group of hams in the UK is doing just that. The Facebook group started as a bit of fun among friends, but the UK Motorhome and Amateur Radio Group has grown into a community that organizers Linda Mary Maud, G0YLM, described as the perfect combination of the 2 hobbies. She believes that amateur radio allows people to travel in one fashion, and a van or motorhome simply allows travel in another fashion. Linda said in a recent posting that the group began a little more than a year ago as a bit of fun between radio friends and has taken off in popularity since then. The advantages include being away from the electrical noises encountered at home and, of course, the chance to meet other hams in person at last. In fact, she said, there are even a few boat owners and campers using tents who have joined the parade of camper vans, caravans, and motorhomes. Linda would love to see the group become an international one. She said if you enjoy radio and enjoy traveling, that's all we ask.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the country and around the world on great repeater systems like the CQ0 UTRZ repeater on 439.175 MHz in Sierra Aristal in Portugal, covering Porto to Lira. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.